It is my great pleasure to introduce the first of two keynote speakers at the 2012 so-called conference. Before that introduction, I'd like to give some thanks to some of the people that helped put this together. And I'm not going to name everyone. I feel like an ingenue at the Academy Awards if I do that. But I will also thank some people tomorrow, so if you don't hear your name now, definitely come
back tomorrow.
Yes. So the board of so-called, I think, deserves a great applause for all the so-called attendees, you guys who paid your registration fees. We wouldn't do this half as well without that. So the vendors for their presence here and their contribution to the cause. Finally, some of you don't know this, but the two keynotes are also being sponsored by the CU President's Ethnic Minority Advisory Committee. So that enabled all CU people to come to the keynotes. And I know there are some people in that boat, but I don't see enough of them. But anyway, they deserve also some thanks, a lot of thanks for that. Because I am the type of person who likes to link one conversation to another, and I hope that we can do that throughout this conference. I think we can do that from the two keynotes, for example. I want to talk to you a little bit about last year's Diversity Summit speaker that was invited by the university, and that happened at Colorado Springs. It was Claude Steele, who spoke about elevating learning through inclusive teaching. Some of you know Steele's work through his book Whistling Vivaldi and other clues to how stereotype affects us, in which Steele exposes the subtle phenomena of stereotype threat. Stereotype threat often happens within the context of educational institutions, the result of which can lead to the underperformance of highly qualified students, which can then contribute to their educational failure. Usually all of this is fully unintentional by the learning centers themselves, but it is systematic and it is all too common. In the Multiliteracy's Classroom, the 2011 book by Professor Mills, she looks at educational prospects and failures not from the standpoint of stereotype threat to highly qualified students, but more from the perspective of how an average student's primary or home discourse may be at odds with school discourse, thus contributing to educational failure. Where Steele and Mills converge is their offering of pedagogic interventions, astute pedagogic interventions, I should say, to address these and our failures. Some may ask, and I didn't actually ask Dr. Mills if she teaches languages, but my assumption was no. Is that true? Do you teach?
No.
Right, yeah, so you might ask, well, why Dr. Mills for a so-called conference and the theme of linguistic diversity on our campuses? Does that fit? And I would definitely say yes, seamlessly. Professor Mills is a shining digital age champion of what may now be called the anthropological, linguistic, Shirley Bryce Heath tradition. She has an unabiding interest in what she describes as the revolutionary project of the New London group, which advocates responsiveness to the diversity of cultures and languages within our communities. And she is a proponent of exploiting rightly the wide variety of our ubiquitous multimedia text types in literacy learning. Kalantzis and Cope of the University of Illinois have this to say about the Multiliteracy's Classroom. It demonstrates in convincing detail how powerful learning can be achieved. In 1 minute, we are hearing the teacher and students talking about rubbish in a pond or the case of the disappearing pimples. In the next, we hear what this means in the conceptualizations of Bakhtin or Vygotsky, of Bourdieu or Kress, of G or Kasdan. In one moment, we hear the lilt of the accents of the children's discussions. In another, this is connected to the theoretical intricacies of discourse, heteroglossia, multimodality, or dialogical spaces. A little bit of disclosure. At ALTEC, we have a SLA reading group, and this year our primary text was the Multiliteracy's Classroom. Judging by the reactions of the reading group, we are up for quite a riveting ride. She came all the way from Queensland University of Technology in Australia to talk about multimodality, media, and access to multiliteracies. It is my great privilege to introduce Professor Kathy Mills.
Thank you for that warm introduction. Now, can the people at the back hear me quite clearly? Excellent. G'day. G'day, mate. When I was talking to a few of you last night, I said, I hope everyone can understand my Australian accent. And someone said, oh, I can tell straight away that you're Australian. And I said, oh, how do you know? And they said, well, Crocodile Dundee, and you know, there's Kylie Minogue, oh, and the iconic Dame Edna. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, we need to raise the bar with our Australian icons. But anyway, g'day. That sounds a little loud. Is that all right?
It's a little loud.
Just a tiny loud. Can we adjust it? Thank you. All right, so I thought just as a sort of icebreaker, I'll give you a few interesting linguistic facts. Just some trivia. Did you know that stewardess is the longest word typed only with your left hand? So if you can only use the correct hand position, that's the longest word, stewardesses. Lollipop is the longest word typed with the right hand. Typewriter is the longest word that can be made using the letters on only one row of the keyboard. No words in the English language rhyme with orange, purple, month, or silver. So all those poets out there, don't even try. The sentence, the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog, uses all the letters in the alphabet. There are only 4 words in the English language that end in D-O-U-S. That's horrendous, stupendous, hazardous, and tremendous. And there are only 2 words that have all the vowels occurring in order, A, E, I, O, and U. Abstemious and facetious. And I had to look up abstemious, pronounced abstemious on the audio, means to abstain or to restrain. And the words race car, level, and kayak are the same whether read from left or right, as you know, palindromes. And then I thought I'd throw in a little interesting fact that's not linguistic. A goldfish has a memory span of 3 seconds. And I just hope today that I'm interesting and a riveting enough speaker that you'll remember what I've said beyond a 3-second time span. So hopefully I'll be interesting. So this is just some of the places where you'll find some of my work published. The stories today that I share are based on my 2011 research monograph, which you see up in the corner, the MultiLiteracy's Classroom, which is available as a Kindle edition ebook. So you can just Google the MultiLiteracy's Classroom and it comes up under, you know, Amazon and all those. And there's some other books there and other publishers. Right, so I thought I'd start up front by clarifying what I mean by the term multiliteracies. Multiliteracies was, as Mark already mentioned, coined by the New London Group in 1996 in the Harvard Educational Review. It refers to 2 key arguments, which many of you may be already familiar with. That is, first of all, that the texts we have are constantly changing. So the nature of textual practices and literacy itself is changing. So when people use the internet, they use different reading comprehension processes. We have a heightened need for critical literacies and so on. And the second issue is cultural and linguistic diversity. which I know is an interest of many of you here. And because this is increasing, we're seeing this both in our local context and globally. So we are often finding ourselves in classrooms in which there are a potpourri of different races, no matter where you go. And this is the case in Australian classrooms, that we have students from all different cultural backgrounds. In many English-speaking countries, bilingual and multilingual speakers of English are integrated into mainstream classrooms, where the teacher is expected to help them catch up with speakers of the dominant language. So today I draw on a case study of a multilingual language learner called Paweni. That's a pseudonym. She's a Thai immigrant, and I describe how she and her peers negotiate cultural and linguistic differences. Now, the lessons occur in a multiliteracies classroom, so I'll talk to you a bit about the teacher, the background of the school, before I go into the anecdotes. I'd also like to just clarify my use of the term modes, because in language studies there are various theorists who use the term. So my use of the term modes is from the New London Group's usage, and by Bill Cope and Mary Kalantzis in their edited volume, Multiliteracies, Literacy Learning and Designs for Social Futures. They've produced this diagram which shows 5 different modes. So we have audio design, which is, they use the term design and modes interchangeably. Things like music, sound effects, or the things that you hear on podcasts. My speaking today. Spatial design. So spatial design refers to things like spatial layouts of a web page. It even refers to things like architectonic meanings, such as, for example, the arrangement of furniture in this room. So we've got tables arranged in rows. I'm standing at the front, which means I have to speak, because that's what the architectonic meanings of this room are suggesting, that I need to speak because I'm at the front of the room and you're facing me. So they're all spatial meanings that we kind of take for granted. Then we have gestural design, so that is movements, bodily movements, and even just the distance between objects, which says something. We have visual design, which is images, things like colours, where the objects point to one another, backgrounding, foregrounding, colours and so on. And then linguistic design, which is the area of syntax and grammar that we've traditionally considered parts of, I guess, learning about words. And so when you have all these modes in combination, we have multimodality. You can have multimodal text with just 2 or more modes. And when you think about it, not many texts that we have today are just monomodal. In a sense, there is always a combination, even from when we have picture books for children, we've got, and they've been around for a long time. So, but with the multimedia, we are seeing more of these multimodal meanings, and that's why they've been foregrounded. So the teacher in this study used the multiliteracies pedagogy. Now, for those who are not familiar with the multiliteracies pedagogy, it has 4 basic phases. Now, they don't have to work in a linear sequence, and they can be sort of mixed around. Situated practice is when you do real-world learning or lifelike experiences. For example, if you take your university students on an excursion or they go on work experience, it's situated in the real world. Overt instruction is what I'm doing now, didactic teaching. And it can also be incidental overt instruction, such as when learners are working on something and the teacher comes and gives them timely instruction. Critical framing is looking at the value-centred assumptions of text. So that's looking at ideologies, stereotypes, issues of gender, race, age, and so on. And then transform practice, which is where students actually create something new, something that's never gone before. So we're not talking about here getting students to just reproduce something, for example, copying a sentence off the blackboard or, rote learning sentences. This is about students actually producing some new knowledge, transforming images, multimedia to create a new text, something that's never gone before. So the knowledge processes are on the right, and that's what the students are doing. So the students experience, they conceptualise, they analyse, and they apply, and they correspond with each of those phases. So the study I refer to is based on a critical ethnography. Critical ethnography is an excellent qualitative research methodology. Some of you may have used it in your research. It's a naturalistic inquiry that is theoretically framed by critical sociology. So there is an upfront theoretical emphasis. And that's a good thing because we all have values, and whether we make them explicit or whether they're implicit, they're always there. So it's often better to just be upfront and say what your theory is. So I chose critical ethnography because it's very good for answering questions about power, access, marginalisation, agency, and so on. It looks at how can we improve things for a better and more social just world. So it's a very useful methodology for answering these sorts of questions when we deal with culturally diverse students. I used a 5-stage methodology now. I thought perhaps there might be some graduate students here today. Are there any graduate students? Just maybe you'd be interested in some of the methodological aspects. So I thought I wouldn't leave them out. So critical ethnography, I used Carl-Becken's version of critical ethnography, which has 5 stages. So you begin doing observational data, which might take any form. You might audio, visual, record, keep field notes. Then you analyse that data in stage 2. Then in stage 3, you have to talk with the participants. So you're not just looking at them and watching them, you're interacting and finding out their perspectives. So you're validating what you observed by finding the insider perspectives. You code and triangulate that data. And then stage 4 and 5 is really interesting. That's where you make connections between things that are happening in the wider global situation and the wider social context and see how that is influencing your context. So for example, if you have a lot of multilingual speakers of different languages in your classroom, why is that? What is happening to the global migration of people, and so on. So it's looking at contextualising the micro in terms of, and relating it to the macro as well. I use basic data collection methods. I used continuous audio-visual recording while I spent time in the field. So I was in a classroom in a school and I audio-visual recorded everything. That was so that I could replay the data and do discourse analysis and fine-grained analysis on what was said and what happened. If you don't have that, you forget, your memory fails you. Used field notes, audio recording. Audio recording was great when you've got lots of groups in a room and you want to know what's going on in all those groups because one video camera doesn't capture that. Collecting artefacts using photographs and keeping a researcher journal. My data analysis involved coding and organising the codes into themes. Pretty much you'll be familiar with that in qualitative research. And the analytic themes that came up as important were pedagogy, power and discourse. And today I'll be looking at discourse. So, pragmatic horizon analysis was another interesting analytic method, and I thought I'd give you a little bit of background on that too, because it's a very useful one for looking at truth claims. So you can get the participants' dialogue and look at what are the normative claims, the subjective claims, and the objective claims in a statement. So it's really good for key things that participants say, something that you know is like a gem and it's got a lot of meaning, and then you can elaborate on that. It's not good for reducing your data because it actually expands, so you have to use it in combination with coding. So I'll give you just a little example of pragmatic horizon analysis. So it's based on Habermas's theory of communicative action, and it's a standard tool in critical ethnography. So you see at the top there, we have in the white a teacher's dialogue. Okay, where are all the naughties? Oh, not the naughties, the level 1s. Okay, now the background to this is that at the school they had a whole school discipline system where at the end of the quarter, the students were distributed into different rooms based on their behaviour during the quarter. So students who were good and didn't have any detentions would get a movie, they get to watch a movie together and eat ice creams as a reward. The students who had a detention, even just one, and that could be for something as simple as not wearing their hat on the playground, because in Australia they're very strict about skin cancer, particularly in Queensland it's called the skin cancer capital, and so schools really reinforce that rule. So a child might forget their hat or not have a hat, and then they get a detention. So interestingly enough, the children who were in the level 1s were all students from different cultures, and there were hardly any Anglo-Australians in that group. So it was marginalising by default students who weren't familiar with the dominant culture. And then those students who had the detentions, they weren't allowed to watch the movie or have the ice cream, but they had to go into a separate room and do grammar workbooks. So they had to sit there doing things like, add ed on the ends of these words. Those sorts of workbooks, they have them here, sort of, on that sort of recycled brown paper that with really small lines, which are very difficult for children. So they had to sit there doing that as a punishment. So this was the way the teacher regarded these students. And then, so if we look at the objective, normative and subjective claims, we can analyse that statement in more detail. So let's look at objectively. She's saying, I've come to collect the appropriate group of students to do the drill and practice workbook. So objectively, she's come in just to collect the students. But then, less foregrounded is the view that she's taking students who are identified as having resistant behaviour to the school rules. There's a normative claim going on there. The students in level 1 are naughty. So there's a judgment, a value judgment about their behaviour, and that's what makes it normative. That less foregrounded is that the other children are good. So the children who aren't put in that category, obviously you're good students. But then we also have her correction. So there's a little bit of a normative thing going on there in terms of her speech. So she says, perhaps I shouldn't have said it that way. That's her judgment of what she should be saying. And then subjectively, we have, you can only imply the subjective claims of participants, but it's good not to ignore it because otherwise you are never getting into that deeper level meaning. So I want you to know that I'm not happy with your behaviour. That might be what she was thinking. Or I'm a bit worried that I just said that. I better correct myself. But then as well as that, she knows that as a teacher, she has the power to say those sorts of things. So there may be a subjective claim there about her role. So I just thought I'd give you that for those of you who are interested in different types of analysis. So the education context was that we have a culturally and linguistically diverse student cohort. It was a suburban state school in Queensland, preparatory to year 7, so they're kindergarten students, about age 4.5 up to year 12, up to age 12. There were 8% Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, and it was in a low socioeconomic area. And in the community, the school community was composed of 25 different nationalities, so that's the students that attend the school. So the teacher had professional development in the MultiLiteracy Pedagogy with Bill Cope and Mary Calancis. So she had direct training. She'd had 8 years of teaching in Queensland, in London and in distance education. And she'd spoken about her multiliteracy's work. So she was quite savvy with the theory. I needed someone for the research who knew the theory well and would be able to enact it in the classroom. So I can see, does using all these new technologies help? Does this improve, access for these students? And I did a pilot study in a number of schools to find this teacher. And she was the best of the teachers I observed. So the students in her classroom were year 6. So they were aged 9 to 11. There were 23 students in the class, and they ranged from a number of different cultures. The majority were Anglo-Australian, but there were Thai, African, Sudanese, Aboriginal, Tongan and Maori and Torres Strait Islander students as well. So you see it's quite a mixture, but then maybe half Anglo-Australian. They were the lowest ability English stream. So the school had streamed the students by ability, and these students were the struggling students with their English and literacy. This was based on the Queensland state test. So in Australia now we have a national curriculum and national test, but at the time they had the state test, and so based on the state test these kids were considered the low ability group and grouped together. 8 students who were considered a bit close to average were withdrawn to join the others in the medium group. and they were all from low to medium socioeconomic backgrounds. They had varied computer ownership. A lot of the children I spoke to had broken computers. A lot of them didn't have internet access. So obviously their access to computers was a lot worse than kids in, say, private schools in Australia. So Paweni, I've got a statement from the teacher there. It's a little bit grammatically incorrect, but this was her verbatim speech, so I've represented it as it was said. Paweni still speaks Thai at home, almost full time with her mum, says the teacher. Her mum, according to Dad, who's Australian, says that Mum has come to Australia but wants desperately to go back to Thailand. She will not give up her Thai culture and will not speak English. That's why I think she's so far behind. So we see that the teacher's got a view of Paweni that she's not hearing enough English at home, and that's contributed to what she's seeing in the classroom. And some judgments there about her parenting and so on, and the mother. And that actually was a picture of Paweni in the classroom there, with her face blurred out. So the lessons that I observed, the students were doing claymation movie making. Who's aware of claymation movie making? Okay, so Wallace and Gromit, Chicken Run, you know, those sorts of movies. So this is what the kids were making in a lot of the lessons, to use new technologies, do script writing, do some audio recording and those sorts of things to help their literacies. So what it involves is basically, when you film, is that it's based on still characters. So you have little play characters, and they might be, you know, just sort of standing like this, and then you move the characters' legs and arms a bit, and you take another photo, and then you move their legs and arms a bit more, take another photo, and then when you put it together, you play it very quickly, and it looks like they are moving, you know, along. And so you have to be careful about things like background objects. They have to stay the same. Things like the lighting has to stay the same, because you don't want them suddenly going dark. And even things like the sun can move in the background to show the passage of time. So living things are moving, non-living are not. So what that involved was the teacher showed them finished claymation movies first by other students, as well as professional ones. Did a little bit of critiquing of some movies, looking at, you know, how power is shown through the figures, the lighting, you know, through shadows and so on. Storyboard design, so they had to, who knows what a storyboard is? Just a series of images with labels under them. So basically the kids had to plan out what were the basic steps in their movie. They made sets. So the sets were like what we call dioramas, you know, like a box with different little painted characters and so on. And characters made out of plasticine on a wooden sort of support structure. Then they had to rehearse the movements of the figures, film it with the camera set up on the, you know, showing only the box but not outside it, otherwise you could tell it was just a small scene, but made it appear that the scene extends beyond the frame. Then they add music files, or they could add a scripted speech or a combination of both, so they could use music and speech. And then they had to digitally edit the movies and then present them. They had to be presented to the school community and to their prep buddies, so they were aiming for a real-world audience for their texts. She also taught some print-based lessons, which were really quite contrasting. So this was with the low ability group. So they had these sessions where they did some very basic grammar things. Things like learning about narratives, how characters are developed, looking at how to say an or at in a sentence, improving sentences with adverbs, using punctuation, choosing better synonyms, and so on. You know, the typical stuff that you see in primary school classrooms. And then they'd go into the computer, what we call the lab, computer laboratory, and just type up the stories and so on. So they had this happening as well as the movie making. So let's just have a look at some of the classroom discourses now and I use discourses here in terms of G's use of the term, as in ways of thinking, being, and so on. So not just what they say, but also how you appear. I mean, for example, if I showed up in rubber Australian thongs in a surf outfit, that would not be appropriate for the discourse and so on. So certain ways of being. So let's have a look at this. So the teacher says, now, in almost all of your writing, I've seen you doing things like this. I had a apple for lunch. Ted, I hope you are watching. You do this. Can I have an apple for lunch? It doesn't even sound right, does it? So you have to try to remember your rule for and and. What if the word was dog? I have an dog for a pet, or I have a dog for a pet. And the children were, teacher, a dog for a pet. And so this lesson went on with lots of example sentences. So you see here, Ted is actually an Indigenous Australian student. And one of the things about Indigenous students is often, as part of their culture, they don't raise their hand to speak. They have what's unsolicited replying, because they're used to being able to freely participate in the discourse without having to do signalling of showing of hands. So here she's drawing attention to the way that Ted didn't use the standard English rule in his dialect. So when he spoke in the classroom, deliberately pointing him out in the lesson, I guess to help him, but as well, it's making a distinction between him and the other students. So while Australia is a multicultural society, English is the national language used and taught and tested in the schools. So this is why she has this agenda. But by default, students from minority ethnic communities are positioned marginally in relation to the dominant culture, and I should say its associated social goods. So students like Ted and Paweni, as you'll see, had a far greater distance to travel in order to catch up with their Anglo-Australian peers. So let's have a look at this following sequence. The students had read Lester and Clyde. It's a book that's published, it's disseminated in Australia. You see it used in schools quite a lot. It's about two fat frogs, and they live in this pond. And the pond gets polluted by humans, and it's got a very strong environmental message. So they'd already dealt with the book in groups, and now the teacher is talking to them as a whole class group and trying to do some critical literacy with them. So she's trying to get to what is the author's message of this text, trying to get them to say, it's an environmental message. But as she's going through it, she's doing some discourse about the adjectives in the story. So tell me two things about Lester. I'm going to be asking Ted and Paweni this time. Paweni had been silent, so they've had some discussion, and she's noticed the two of them haven't made enough contribution to the whole class discussion. And so Paweni doesn't say anything. Paweni, tell me two things about Lester. No response. And then Ted says, old. And the teacher says, definitely not old. Clyde's old. Don't tell her. What are two things you can tell me about Lester the Frog? I'll come back to you, Ted. Two things. He's small and cheeky, which was correct. He's small and cheeky. Okay. Paweni, anything else you can tell me about Lester? No response. Listen to the sentence. Lester is smaller and he's a lot of fun. A naughty, a cheeky, a mischievous one. What can you tell me about Lester? No response. Is he a good frog? And then she says, no. So what tells you that he's not a good frog? Because he's, and so another student has jumped in because it's getting quite tense because the student is not able to answer the question and the student's giving the answer. Now I put an image here which is from Sean Tan's book, The Red Tree. It's a picture book and he also does graphic novels which don't have any words. And if you have a look at that picture, it's kind of like surrealism. It has all different words randomly displayed on the picture without sense or reason. You see, I don't know if you can see from up the back, but down the bottom is a little girl with red hair and she's climbing a ladder and she's standing at this sort of window and there's just words like you and reading, system and random words, and I think it's a really good picture of what the world is like for Paweni, because in the classroom the things that the teacher is saying are not making sense to her. That's what it's like, a big jumble of odd things that don't fit together, of words that are all blurred together and don't make sense. So let's look at the rest of the conversation. The teacher says, I'm asking Paweni, thank you. Who can tell Paweni what words there tell us about Leicester? Ted? Ted mumbled something. I can't hear you. Sit up, Ted. So Ted is not sitting right. He's not looking like the attentive student that he should be in his body language. He reckons that he has fun. He's full of fun, but I want to know what words there tell that he is not a good frog. Sarah? Joseph says, mischievous. The teacher says, mischievous. And naughty. And naughty. Thank you. Did you hear that, Paweni? Naughty and mischievous. They're the words that we just read, and that's describing him. Because if this is how the lesson's going, how do you think Paweni would feel at that point in the lesson? I put that picture there, which is also from Sean Tan's book, and it's a picture of a rather grotesque fish or creature of some sort, and you can see in the background the scales that are up against the wall, like a sort of shadowy, dark world, and you can see the colours are very grey, and there's a little girl there stooped over, and you can see from her gestures that, you know, she's looking, you know, depressed. And so I just put that there as a sort of picture of what things are like for Queen. And so a little bit later on, the students are now working in groups. So we're out of the whole class discussion, and the kids are in their groups. Paweni's working with Joseph and David, who are Anglo-Australian, and Rose, who's also Anglo-Australian. And they're making up a storyboard for their movie. And the teacher says, sounds to me like you two, and she points to Joseph and David, are doing a lot of the thinking. What's Paweni done today? And then Joseph says, and then David said, she's just, and then Rose said, she's trying to, okay, Paweni, can you tell me what you're doing today? What's your job? And then she says, Mum. You're going to be the mum? And the children say, yeah. Are any of these your ideas today? Have you got any suggestions? Have you thought about what we should use on the set? Are you going to have trees? Are you going to have hills? That's what she's thinking. Yeah. Can you make sure Paweni has some suggestions? And then she walks off. All right, so you can imagine the student has, you can see 5 rapidly spoken sentences, very quick, sort of trying to get her to contribute. During this time, I've been filming them as a group, and Paweni was sitting there nodding, she was listening. I don't know if you've heard of legitimate peripheral participation, like Lave's situated learning. She was actually learning by watching. She was involved, she was nodding, smiling, and interacting gesturally with the students. So that was all she could do, because actually, while I was in the field, I only ever heard her speak 1 or 2 words, and they were usually verbs or a noun. And that's why she couldn't elaborate. Her actual understanding of English wasn't as advanced as what the teacher was expecting, plus the pressure of responding like that. But you see the children have defended her. So they're showing inclusivity because they are trying to, you know, they're trying to justify her because actually they had accepted her into their group, which was a positive thing. So I've got a little picture there, and I think that you can see the little megaphone has got letters coming out of it, just random English letters tumbling out. And I sort of see that, like Paweni, she wants to say something, but it's just not coming out right. You know, just like standing on a ladder and trying to blast it out, but it's all just coming out all muddled. And that's how it is for her. So let's have a look now at some students who were more familiar with the classroom discourse. So this is a group who were Anglo-Australians. They were working on another project, and the support teacher was there trying to get them to formulate the script. So they'd made the stage set, and they were doing the script writing. But the students don't quite pick up here that she wants a direct script. They think she just wants a summary of the storyline. So the support teacher says, well, what are you saying in your movie? She's going to take the person who has pimples, who is Melian, she's going to take her to the shops to buy all stuff. Yeah. And what are you going to say? Let's go to the shops. do you want to put something to try this stuff on your face? And do you want to get some of this stuff on your face? Is that a nice job for the preppies, the preparatory school? Prep school children at age 5. Are you going to have them listening to you saying, are you going to come and get this stuff? No. No. You would say, would you like to come to the shops and buy some cosmetics? Some cosmetics, in a pleased tone of voice. So we see here that Sarah is familiar with what sort of responses are going to satisfy the teacher's requirement. And she immediately switched from, stuff on your face to using the correct terminology. So you see, children like this, they've been brought up in the culture, so they know how to respond to the teacher. And you see this right through, if you ever read my book, the children that are familiar with the culture do everything right. Things like saying, oh, we're working really hard, miss. And that sort of thing. The teacher says, oh, good, But students like Paweni, they don't say things like that. They don't know how to defend themselves or give an answer. So I just put this picture here because, and I'll try to get this on. That's my sort of idea there of Paweni. You can see her behind the picture frame. Now, this is a picture of a child looking out of the window, and reflected in the window is all sorts of exciting things that are going on outside. So there's something in the sky, there's brightness, there's sunshine, but she's behind the window and there's actually a padlock on the window and she can't open it to get out. And I just put that because that's what happens when you have students who, some of them are familiar. There's all these great things like movie making going on in the classroom and great technologies and all that. But then students like Paweni are basically locked out from accessing all those wonderful things. The world is passing her by. So let's have a look at some positive examples from the children. So the children are now drawing the stage set. So they're doing a scene with an ambulance, a child crossing the road, and it's got a road safety message. So Paweni noticed that when the children drew the road, they did it very roughly. They just got their pencils and didn't even rule lines. And so she's actually a bit of an artist. So she was actually rubbing out the lines and getting a ruler and straightening it up, ready for when they did the painting. She's a bit of a perfectionist with artwork. So she says, that's more big. And she's rubbing out the existing drawing of a road. So you can see she muddles up the comparative term too big with more big. And so David says, Paweni, that road's too big. So he models it, but without reprimanding her, just showing her the correct model. And then Joseph says, very big. And then Rose says, way, way, way too big. So all three children are actually participating with her in sense making by restating it multiple ways so that she can pick it up. And a little bit later, I was so delighted when she said at the end there, wait, too big. And I was just, so excited when I saw she'd actually picked it up from the kids role modelling it. So in just a few minutes, she corrected that grammar through practice and through their sensitive, inclusive discourses. And so there's a picture there of a little girl in a dark room, and you can see the light is just coming in and it's shining on this little tiny bright plant in the background of a very dark grey scenery. But suddenly there it is right in front of you, bright and vivid, quietly waiting. And so I think that little plant is like a picture of the children who are participating with Paweni and sense making and giving us a positive example of how these children can be included in this in group work and movie design. So let's have a look at a little bit more at their conversation in the group. The students are talking about what's going to happen in the story. He should be on top of the car after the accident. Yeah, on the windshield of the car. I'll draw the car. I'll draw this time. You can have a turn. And then Joseph turns to Paweni, who's just watching, and he realises that she hasn't had a chance to have a say. She hasn't had a voice in the design. So he turns to her and said, is that what you want? Is that what you want to have? Is that what you want to happen? So you have a look at that sentence. Paweni says yes, and she nods, and she's very happy because she's been invited into the group decision making. He says, is that what you want? And he repeats that same phrase 3 times, but each time he extends the sentence just a little bit more so that it makes sense. And that's, he says that he's using repetition, he's slowing down the speed of his speech, and so on. So he's really scaffolding Paweni's involvement in the group decision-making and conversation. And then a little bit later, I was watching the group and I came over and I saw that they had a blue background with nothing in the sky, a lot of blue. And so I said, oh, are you going to have clouds? And Rose said, I know what we could do. We could make the clouds out of these. And she picks up some cotton wool. David says, oh, why don't we just paint them? We're going to use wool for the trees. So we're just discussing what media will be used. And then Joseph says, look, she's doing that. Look what Paweni's doing. And he got louder and louder. And when we looked, Paweni was drawing the cloud outline ready for us to stick, whether we were painting or using the cotton wool balls. She was anticipating, she could hear what was being said, and she was starting to get on with the job because that's what she could do. So she had the ability the receptive language to understand what was happening, and she had the visual skills. So supported with the visual reference for speech, she was able to make sense. And that's a little picture of a girl drawing an outline of herself. And I think here this is a really good picture of identity. So Paweni's starting to develop an identity as the artist of the group. And she's creating a picture, and she's got status in the group. She's no longer an outsider to the discourse. So are we making the required discourses explicit? Have a look at this one. In this example, they're now moving on to the audio design. I think this is the last transcript. Am I going all right for time? Yes? Not getting bored? That's good. So they're at the audio recording stage now. So they have to record their speech to put it on the filmed images. And Paweni has chosen to be the mum, so she's got certain lines to say in the skit. So she says, look out for cars. And David says, okay, mum. And then she says, watch out, run. And the teacher says, no, remember, we're just recording this bit, this snippet. Listen to how clear you were, and if there's background sound. So she replays it for them to listen to the quality. Could you hear Paweni? And the 2 boys say, yes. And she said, clearly? No, you need to speak clearly. I know English is a second language, so this is hard for you. Look out for cars. And then Paweni, a bit later, is just rehearsing it over and over to get it right. This was hard work for her. Watch out, run. No, watch out, run. Watch out, run. Doesn't sound like you're yelling. Try it again. Watch out, run. And watch out, run. So she's starting to get a little bit of the drama in her voice. Watch out. And then she fumbles and looks at her script to have a look. Watch out, run. And the teacher says, you've only got 3 words to remember. Watch out, run. You don't need to look at it. So because Paweni's now referring back to the script, she's nervous. She's getting reprimanded. But you see that the teacher's actually scaffolding a few things there from an audio point of view. So we're just recording this bit, so she's looking at duration. Listen to how clear you were, so diction and volume. You need to speak clearly, and then she also looks, it doesn't sound like you're yelling, so she's looking at the expression. So she's trying to scaffold those audio elements, but she's getting very frustrated with Paweni. And that's a picture of a little girl on a stage, and you can't quite see it, but that's the stage. There's a curtain, and there's dark figures watching, like all the people watching her on the stage, and she's got a little puppet in her hand, and she's standing stooped, like she doesn't know how to perform, like she's been asked, she doesn't know what she's been required to do. And you can see there's all these hideous figures on the stage, and a trumpet blowing in her ear, people yelling, and she doesn't know what she's supposed to do. And I think that's how it is for a lot of our multilingual and bilingual students. They're like that child on the stage and like Paweni, who just, they don't know what's been expected of them. So the message today is that digital classrooms are not exempt from the historical reproduction of inequity. So in this classroom that we saw, there was reproduction of what was going on outside the school. So the students who were already familiar with the discourse, who were good at English, did well in the claymation movie making, and they took on roles and performed well. But the students who were not of the dominant culture, they struggled with this, even though it was multimodal, it was digital and so on, because the classroom discourses were not inclusive. So for ethnically and socio-economically marginalised learners, the secondary discourses of the classroom were enabling for speakers of the dominant language but inaccessible to the newcomers. And that was also seen in terms of economic differences too. So there were some children who were from Anglo-Australian backgrounds, but from very poor backgrounds, like kids who'd lost their parents, their dad in a brawl, in a drunken brawl, and didn't have food to eat, you know, that sort of thing. They were also struggling too. So it wasn't just the culturally diverse students, it was also those who were from disadvantaged backgrounds economically. So familiarity with the dominant culture and its meaning-making structures is a key issue in accessing multiliteracies. So it's just important because there is a lot of hype around multimedia, and I'm a great believer in new technologies and so on. As you can see, I'm using a Prezi, and I like visual and multimodal things. But remember that that's important but not sufficient for culturally inclusive classrooms, and we really do need to evaluate our discourses that we're using and make sure that we're not marginalising students by default because we haven't considered our own way of speaking with the students. So The Red Tree is the name of Sean Tan's book. So I call it The Search for the Red Tree. And I've got a nice little picture here to finish off, and it's a positive one. Just as you imagine it would be. There's a child with that little tiny leaf that was in the bedroom before has now grown into a beautiful tree, and that's what we hope to see with our culturally diverse students, is that we provide them with as many opportunities as we can to help them have that positive future and an identity. So in conclusion, discourses matter in a multiliteracies classroom. I'd like to thank you for listening and appreciate it.
We have about 4 minutes for questions.
So the teacher that was handling Paweni, how was the teacher's already? The teacher, how old was
The
she?
teacher. The teacher was in around 30 or so, or early 30s.
Did you have like any preparations for teachers to handle multicultural classrooms?
Yes, in Queensland universities, in the education courses, there are usually courses on sociology. They sometimes get compulsory units on Indigenous, particularly how to handle Indigenous Australian students. And sometimes that's embedded in the programs. So all of the lecturers have to deal with that somewhere in their subject, like whether you're science or mathematics or English. But other cultures are not particularly given special attention, except for, I guess, more general, politically correct attitudes, I guess.
Because it seems to me that the teacher was not really acquaintance of what her culture was, and especially like when she was quite strict, like try to repeat hard, which is a really difficult thing for Thai people and now Asian languages, because they don't have R sounds. So for them, having that pronunciation.
Yes, that's right. And so there's a lack of ignorance, there's some ignorance there on the teacher's part too, in terms of understanding cultural diversity, definitely. Yes.
Yeah, but I see this as a story with a happy ending because even though the teacher was in a way embodying the whatever the standard, which is nice to be confronted to, she also made room for children to work on their own. So she let that little girl find her way thanks to the people out here more able to help her. So she, in fact, in the classroom, they work the entire world. Not just a world where people are caring, take their time and all, but she maybe in a way she learned how to cope and who to associate with. So it's also a lesson.
And you can see in the group work that obviously group work allowed for more of those interactions to happen.
Yes.
Do you feel like the project of having to make a product like a claymation movie heightened the stress that the teacher was feeling because there was so much at stake, you know, such a complex process?
Yes.
I mean, is it really a useful activity for
Yes.
kids who are struggling so much just to...
I think so. Well, actually, the end of that story is that the teacher had a Clothies award night, and she had a red carpet, and the children all got trophies. So they did get a lot of kudos in the end. But I guess it was a lot of, in time, it was a lot of time usage to do it. It's just a time-consuming project. And the teacher did feel a lot of stress. And at the same time, she had all these behavioural problems from other group of boys, which I talk about in the book, who were constantly going out of their way to make trouble and ended up being excluded from the group altogether. So they didn't even get to do a movie and had to do grammar activities for a couple of weeks while the others were doing all the multiliteracies, which, you know, it's just interesting to see how it all pans out. But yes, have I answered your question? Sorry,
No,
I'm trying to think
I
of
mean,
it.
in your final analysis,
Yes.
could she have been doing something else where the students would have learned the skills?
Yes.
I know that making a movie, that is a great skill to learn.
Well, we work in a school called Waterford West State School, and we've got about 9 academics working there trying to do a sort of school reform in multiliteracies. And we haven't used claymation movie making partly for that reason, because it is a very time-consuming project, and what we find is teachers are much better able to pick up simple technologies that don't use up a lot of the teaching time just to learn the technology. You know, like things like online comic creation or even just simple PowerPoints, using iWeb templates to write up things because it's a very simple program and things like that. So in terms of the array of different multimedia choices, it's a very complex, you know, media arts type activity, and it's very complex. So there were things that the kids were doing wrong because they didn't understand the process. And, you know, during the filming, Paweni kept walking in front of the camera and the teacher was constantly saying, move out the way, move out the way. And she didn't even contribute to the filming because the boys were on the cameras, you know, so there was that sort of thing happening as well. So in terms of a useful project, it's probably, in terms of the benefits, not one of the better choices of a multimedia. Unless you're a real art expert, media arts expert, and have professionals in the room to help with the groups.
Thank you very much.